and gentlemen, welcome back to yet another episode of The Draw Step. And today we have another deck build for you. This one is framed all around killing your opponents with kindness. So, what are we working with? Our commander is Kwain, an Itinerant Meddler, a happy little bunny for, it's a 1/3 for Azorius, white-blue. You can tap it. Each player may draw a card, then each player who draws a card this way gains a life. So that right there is just sunshine and hugs wrapped into a commander. And why would anybody be afraid of that? Nobody should be afraid of that. We're going to get into why your opponent should be afraid of that. All right, starting off, basic lands. You know them, you love them, everybody's got them. Moving right along, we got our non-basic lands just to help with ramping and filtering our mana to make sure we have the right colors we're looking for. Although with our commander only being 2 mana, that should not be too hard to accomplish. Then we got one Planeswalker in the deck, Jace, Wielder of Mysteries. Couple different advantages. So he has the steady ability of if you would draw a card while your library has no cards in it, you win the game. As I've talked about before on this channel, I love winning the game in other ways outside of like winning the game, how you're supposed to win the game. That just soft spot in my heart. But on top of that, +1 ability. Target player puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard, draw a card. I wouldn't say this is exactly a mill deck, but like it's a mill adjacent deck. It's a part-time dabbler in the mill arts. And then -8, draw 7 cards, then if your library has no cards in it, you win the game, which feels very redundant upon his previously stated ability, but hey, whatever works. All right, enchantments. Starting off, probably one of the saltiest cards in Commander, Smothering Tithe. There are going to be a lot of cards drawn by both you and your opponents, so you might as well be getting some mana. There we go. That's what I was looking for. Mana for them drawing cards. Dovescape, a ridiculous control piece for the deck. Anytime somebody's playing a card, whether it be you or your opponents, if it is not a creature spell, that thing is getting canceled. What's the word I'm looking for? Countered. Man, English is a hard language. Counters its spell and creates X/1/1 white-blue bird creature tokens with flying, where X is that spell's converted mana cost. So that, again, is just kind of a bit of a control piece there. Then Dictate of Krufix? Pronunciation is not my strong suit. Wow. At the beginning of each player's draw step, that player draws an additional card. So if you're sensing a theme yet, there is going to be a lot of card draw going on with this deck. Mirror Maid. We got a lot of enchantments in our deck and artifacts, both of which give us value. So when this enters the battlefield, it becomes a copy of one of those pieces. Court of Cunning. When it enters the battlefield, you become the monarch. At the beginning of your upkeep, any number of target players each mill 2 cards. If you're the monarch, each of those players mill 10 cards instead. Again, nice little mill piece if you decide to go that route. Thought Reflection. If you would draw a card, draw 2 cards instead. So all of your card draws that you're doing are now going to be doubled up with that. Noble Heritage. I want to take a quick step back. So you're doing a lot of things as far as forcing your opponents to draw cards, drawing cards yourself, gaining life and whatnot. This is a very group hug-esque deck, but it's not very aggro deck. You're not going to be doing a lot of attacking, and you don't have the best defenders, so you're going to want to have other more unique ways of keeping you and your board state safe. So, Noble Heritage. Commander creatures you own have, when this creature enters the battlefield and at the beginning of your upkeep, each player may put 2 1/1 counters on a creature they control. For each opponent who does, you gain protection from that player until your next turn. So again, this is a way to keep you safe while also buffing your opponent's creatures so they have to go against each other and hopefully take themselves out before they can take you out. Solitary Confinement, exact same thing as far as protecting yourself while also it does have a bit of a downside. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice it unless you discard a card, and you have to skip your draw step, but you're going to be drawing so many cards throughout in other ways, that's not going to be a problem for you. But it gives you Shroud and prevent all damage that would be dealt to you. So your opponents ain't doing crap to you. Force Fruition. This is a ridiculous card. For 7 mana, anytime an opponent would cast a spell, that player draws 7 cards. So this is the point where nice things stop being nice things. Because everybody loves card draw in Magic, right? Like, you want to be touching as many of your cards as possible to get to all the good stuff. But when every time you're trying to lay a card, you are now getting 7 cards, and you can only have 7 cards in hand at the end of your turn, you're going to have to start discarding a lot of cards, and players are not going to love that. Sphinxes, Tutelage. Whenever you draw a card, target opponent puts the top 2 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. If they're both non-land cards that share a color, repeat this process. So again, a little bit more mill. Either way, we're really just churning through our opponent's decks and trying to mill them out, or we do have a couple other ways of winning, which we'll get to in a second here. Well of Ideas. When it enters the battlefield, draw 2 cards, and at the beginning of each other player's draw step, that player draws an additional card, and at the beginning of your draw step, draw 2 additional cards. So your opponents will be getting value, but you'll be getting more value, and again, we're going to turn them drawing cards into a positive for us. Ominous Seas. Anytime you would draw a card, you put an omen counter on it. Once you get 8 counters on it, you get to create an 8/8 blue Kraken creature token. And last but not least, for our enchantments, Wizard class. Does a couple different things. Gives you no maximum hand size, which is going to be great with the amount of cards that you are drawing. You can upgrade it and draw 2 cards, and on the final level, anytime you draw a card, you get to put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control. So that is going to be coupling all of your card draw with now making your creature stronger. Speaking of creatures, that's what's up next. Marching Duodrone. Woo! Pronunciation again. Whenever Marching Duodrone attacks, each player creates a treasure token. So again, just a friendly little guy helping everybody out. We love friendly things. Speaking of friendly things, we got the cutest pupper ever. Basically, it blinks a card. Anytime it attacks, blinks a card. If it's your card, if it's a creature, when it re-enters, it gets a +1/+1 counter on it. Jace's Archivist, pay 1, tap it, and it's a wheel effect. Makes everyone discard their hand and then draw cards equal to the amount of cards discarded that way, or the most cards that are discarded that way. Mischievous Mystic. This, again, is a nice value piece. Every time you draw 2 cards on a turn, so not just your turn, but even your opponent's turns, there will be ways for you to draw cards, and every time you do 2, you get a 1/1 blue fairy creature token with flying. So it gives you some protection and some flyers, so if your opponent is playing a deck that doesn't have any flyers, right over their head, take them out. Chasm Skulker. Whenever you draw a card, put a 1/1 counter on Chasm Skulker. When Chasm Skulker dies, create X 1/1 blue squid creature tokens with Island Walk, where X is the number of 1/1 counters on Chasm Skulker. So again, you're going to be drawing a lot of cards, and with this, you're going to be getting all those 1/1 counters on it. So even if it dies, you now have a massive army of 1/1s that probably won't be able to get blocked. Geyser Drake, another little flyer, makes your instants and sorceries less by 1. Great value. Guafa Hazid Profiteer. You can pay Izzet and not Izzet, Azorius. Jeez. White blue, put a bribery counter, tap it, put a bribery counter on target creature you don't control. Its controller draws a card. Creatures with bribery counters on them can't attack or block. So this is a way to slowly shut down your opponent's boards, or at least their biggest creatures. Yes, they're getting a card, but they're also no longer able to use their creature. Nader Kraken. Whenever you draw a card, put a 1/1 counter on it, and you get a 1/1 blue tentacle creature token. So with all the cards that you're going to be drawing, you can be paying that 1, buffing that bad boy up, and getting a lot of other creatures. Flumph. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but I choose to believe that's how you pronounce it because I love that pronunciation. When it's dealt damage, you and target opponent each draw a card. Again, going into our theme. Howling Golem. When it attacks or blocks, each player draws a card. Body of Knowledge. Its power and toughness are equal to the number of cards in your hand. You have no maximum hand size, and when he is dealt damage, you draw that many cards. So as time goes on, this is going to get beefier and beefier, and you're going to be drawing a whole lot of cards with that. Skycrier, 1/1 with flyer and lifelink, and gives you and an opponent the ability to draw a card. Fairy Vandal. When you draw cards, put a 1/1 counter on it, and it's a flyer. So again, it's going to turn into a pretty big creature to either swing or defend with. Weathered Wayfarer. This gives you a way to ramp if your opponents have more land or you're falling behind. Shabariz, the Sky Shark. It has a partner, but we do not have the partner in this deck. But whenever you draw a card, put a 1/1 counter on Sky Shark, and you gain 1 life. So again, it's now coupling our card draw with beefing this and gaining us some life. Dakara Mystic. Pay 1, tap. Each player reveals the top card of his or her library. You may put the revealed cards into their owner's graveyards. If you don't, each player draws a card. So you really get the choice if you want to mill your opponents or if you want to force them to draw a card. You can go either way. There goes my backdrop. Fairy Mastermind. Whenever an opponent draws their second card each turn, you draw a card. So again, gives you even more value on your opponent's turns as well too. Fogbank. Prevent all damage, combat damage that would be dealt to and dealt by Fogbank. So this is a nice little way to protect yourself in a pinch. Loxton Gatekeeper. Artifacts, creatures, and lands your opponent's control come into play tapped. This deck definitely does have some stacks pieces, so it could be seen as a fairly toxic deck since you don't really have the ability to swing very effectively. You're going to want to have ways to control your opponent's board state. So that's a nice piece to do that. Master of Ceremonies. At the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent chooses money, friends, or secrets. For each player who chooses money, you and that player each create a treasure token. For each player who chooses friends, you and that player create a 1/1 green and white citizen creature token. And for each player who chooses secrets, you and that player each draw a card. So this is going to be a really big value piece for you. And regardless of what your opponents choose, you're going to be getting something good out of it. Clinquant Sky Mage. Whenever you draw a card, put a 1/1 counter on this creature. We've gone through a couple like these, but we have multiple of them that are all giving you more value. Grand Abolisher. During your turn, your opponents can't cast spells or activate abilities of artifacts, creatures, or enchantments. This is basically giving you protection during your turn so you can do what you want to do and your opponents aren't going to be able to do anything about it. Council of Four. Whenever a player draws their second card during their turn, you draw a card. And whenever a player casts their second spell during their turn, you create a 2/2 white knight creature token. The value on this is ridiculous because that's counting not just your turn, but all of your opponent's turns as well too. So if you're playing with 3-4 opponents, you're going to be drawing 3-4 cards. You're probably going to be getting quite a few creatures every time around the board. So that is nice. Swans of Bryn Argyle. If a source would deal damage to Swans of Bryn, prevent that damage. The source's controller draws cards equal to the damage prevented this way. Again, you have a nice little piece of protection there. Really, it doesn't say that it's indestructible, but it basically is indestructible because any damage that would be dealt to it is prevented and they're just drawing cards instead. Now we have a couple other pieces as far as dealing with all of the card draw that we're doing. Living Conundrum. It's a 5-mana 2/5 with hexproof. And this is a wild card. It says, if you would draw a card while your library has no cards in it, skip that draw instead. So typically, if you're supposed to draw and you have no cards in your library, you lose the game. Well, in this case, you don't lose the game. This creature just gets even stronger. As long as there are no cards in your library, Living Conundrum has base power and toughness 10/10 and has flying and vigilance. So when you're in a situation where normally you should lose the game, now you just have a giant swinging card, so that's fun. Walking Archive. Walking Archive comes into play with a 1/1 counter on it, and at the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player draws a card for each 1/1 counter on Walking Archive, and for the low price of 4 mana, you can put more 1/1 counters on it. So that is another way of forcing your opponents to draw more cards, allowing you to draw more cards, and that can become a giant beefy golem. Psychosis Crawler. This is a great way to now start punishing your opponents for all of the card draw that's happening. Whenever you draw a card, each opponent loses a life. So when you're drawing 5, 6, 7 cards a turn, your opponents, you are going to drain them out very quickly. And since it says each opponent, that gives you a way to take out the entire, all of your opponents and not just be focused on one. Viceling. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, Viceling deals X damage to that player, where X is the number of cards in his or her hand -4. Don't worry, we're going to be keeping our opponents very well stocked on cards, so each turn they're probably going to be losing 3 life. Scrawling Crawler. At the beginning of your upkeep, each player draws a card. So again, giving more card draw to your opponents. And whenever an opponent draws a card, that player loses 1 life. So when we go back to some of the other cards that we have in this deck, like the Force Fruition or things like that, every time they cast a spell, they're drawing 7 cards. Well, now they're losing 7 life on top of that as well, too. So coupled with a couple of the different pieces that we have in this deck, this card can quickly take out your opponents. Laboratory Maniac. If you're choosing to lean more into milling yourself out through all this card draw, this is a great piece. If you would draw a card while your library has no cards in it, you win the game instead. Again, like I said, I love winning the game in ways that you shouldn't win the game. Thrass's Oracle, this is one of the more iconic alternate win cons from the game. Does the exact same thing as Laboratory Maniac. Basically, if there's no cards in your library when it enters, you win the game. I am not even going to begin to pronounce this card's name. It's thingamajigger, but all that really is important is that at the beginning of your upkeep, if you have exactly 13 cards in your hand, you win the game. Gonna be very easy for you to get to 13 cards. Speaking of winning the game in other ways, last but not least for our creatures, we have Felidar Sovereign, Vigilance, Lifelink, 4/6. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you have 40 or more life, you win the game. I don't know how to tell you this, but in Magic the Gathering, at least in Commander, you start the game with 40 life. So that is not a very hard bar to accomplish, but those are our creatures. All right. Artifacts. Starting off with our ramp pieces. Soul Ring, 2 mana. Every deck should have one. Decanter of Endless Water. Taps for 1, but big advantage is that you have no maximum hand size. Stone Speaker Crystal, 4 mana. Taps for 2, or you can sack it and get a card. Mind Stone. No. I lied. That's what Mind Stone does. Mind Stone, you can sack it and get a card. Stone Speaker Crystal, you can sacrifice it, exile any number of target players' graveyards, and you draw a card. So you do get that card draw that I thought you got, but you're also getting rid of your opponent's graveyards, which is great. Alhamrit's Archive, if you would gain life, you gain twice that much life instead, and if you draw a card, except for the first one, you draw on each of your draw steps, draw 2 cards instead. So basically, you're gaining double life and drawing double cards, except for the first card you would draw. That's a pretty huge piece, especially when you couple it with something like Venser's Journal. For 5 mana, gives you no maximum hand size, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you gain 1 life for each card in your hand. So you're now drawing, if you have both of these pieces in play, you're going to be drawing double cards, and then at the beginning of your upkeep, it's going to look at all the cards in your hand, you gain 1 life for them, and then it would double that. So you're going to be gaining quite a bit of life there. Wedding Ring. Going back to helping everybody out, so to speak. When Wedding Ring enters the battlefield, if it was cast, target opponent creates a token that's a copy of it. Whenever an opponent who controls an artifact named Wedding Ring draws a card during their turn, you draw a card. Whenever an opponent who controls an artifact named Wedding Ring gains life during their turn, you gain that much life. So, whoever you give this Wedding Ring to, you and them, y'all are besties now. They get cards, you get cards. They get life, you get life. Because why not? Spellbook, 0 mana, no maximum hand size. Love it. Pendant of Prosperity. Enters the battlefield under the control of an opponent of your choice. Pay 2, tap it, draw a card. This is, again, what your opponent would be doing with it on the battlefield under their control. They draw a card, put a land card from their hand onto the battlefield, but then its owner draws a card and may put a land card from their hand onto the battlefield. So again, it's giving it does give your opponent some benefit, but they're the ones that have to pay the 2 mana, and you're getting free benefit out of it. Magic Mirror. It costs 6 and 3 blue, but it can cost 1 less to cast for each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard. You Gives you no maximum hand size, and at the beginning of your upkeep, put a knowledge counter on the magic mirror. Then draw a card for each knowledge counter on magic mirror. So we do have a pretty good amount of instant and sorcery cards that are going to be in our graveyard, so we should be able to get this out for pretty inexpensive. Gives us no maximum hand size, and going to draw us quite a few cards as the game goes on. Last of our artifacts, Iron Maiden. During each of your opponent's upkeep, Iron Maiden deals 1 damage to that player for each card more than 4 in his or her hand. We already went over a creature that does basically the same thing. Again, just penalizing our opponents for all of those cards that they're drawing. Sorceries, Requisition Raid. I love these spree spells. They give you the ability to do more based on what you need to accomplish. Cost 1 off the bat, and then you can pay 1 more, destroy target artifact, pay 1 more, destroy target enchantment, and pay 1 more, put a 1/1 counter on each creature target player controls. So quite a bit of flexibility all on one spell. Seize the Secrets. This spell costs 1 less to cast if you committed a crime, so you can play it for as low as 2 mana and draw 2 cards. That's some pretty good return on investment right there. Sakashima's Will. You can choose 1 if you control a commander. As you cast a spell, you may choose both. We are playing commander. You're probably going to control your commander when you play this. Target opponent chooses a creature they control. You gain control of it. Choose a creature you control. Each other creature you control becomes a copy of that creature until end of turn. So that can be a pretty solid way to, if like your opponent has a really strong creature, you can copy it and then make your entire board that creature. Idyllic Tutor, 3 mana. Search your library for an enchantment card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library depending on which direction you want to go. There are some really strong enchantments in this deck, so now you have a way of going to find it and then play it later. And last but not least of our sorceries, probably one of my favorite win cons out there, Approach of the Second Sun. If Approach of the Second Sun was cast from your hand and you've cast another spell named Approach of the Second Sun, you win the game. Otherwise, put Approach of the Second Sun into its owner's library, 7th from the top, and you gain 7 life. So, this is a tremendous sorcery for just out of nowhere. Well, not necessarily out of nowhere. You do have to play it once. It goes back into your deck. And then, oh, lo and behold, I just happened to draw 7 more cards. Who could have seen that coming? And as short of your opponents having a counterspell, if they don't have a counterspell, they're cooked. You play it, you lay it, woo! You won the game. You worked so hard for that. You deserve to win. All right, instance. Sulundi Vision, that's definitely not how you pronounce it. Look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal an instant or sorcery card from among them, put it into your hand, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Nice little way to find instant or sorcery card you might need. And plus side, if you don't need that, can enter as a land. Cool. Consider this. Look at the top card of your library. You may put that card in your graveyard, draw a card. It basically is just scry 1, draw a card. Pull from Tomorrow, X and 2 blue, draw X cards, then discard X cards. Quick way to draw a bunch of cards. Expel, exile target creature. Really like a Source of Plowshares or any sort of exile card could work there. And then some counter spells. Hindering Light, this is both countering and drawing you a card. Essence Capture, countering and giving you a 1/1 counter. Long River's Pull. This one, you're both gifting a card and countering a spell. So you're forcing an opponent to do something they probably don't want to do and countering what they did want to do. Win-win. And last but not least, an offer you can't refuse with some really nice art. So that is the deck. Again, in a nutshell, what we are trying to accomplish with this deck is to appear very cute, very friendly, very demure. And in the end, we are actually just really giving our opponents a bunch of cards that they never wanted, never asked for. You are turning a good thing into an objectively terrible thing, and that sounds like a great time to me. Now, if you thought this was a great time, you really should probably subscribe, like the video, and you're going to see a recommendation for another video that you should watch, one of my other deck builds. That being said, I'll see y'all next time.